In John's first pass around death anxiety, he discussed a set of events: health problems, aging, death of friends or loved ones. They're just a few of the more obvious that could be potential triggers for an overly anxious reaction to some aspect of death. According to what is certainly, in terms of numbers, the leading research tradition in the field of death anxiety today, terror management theory, all these triggers produce a special stimulus referred to as mortality salience. So I'd like to follow up on John's introduction with a quick look from this perspective, not the reaction, but the trigger. The term mortality salience describes the awareness of one's eventual death. But it's more than just some vague, barely conscious awareness. Salience is a term that comes from heraldry, thus the illustration here, and it refers to an element of the design that leaps out at you. It's from the Latin salience, or of the verb salio, to leap or spring. And in so doing, the true meaning of the whole design is revealed. In our context, it refers to the idea that death is broken out of the unconscious, the background, and into a level of meaningful awareness. Meaningful, but generally not so comfortable. Mortality salience is a formal term within the field of terror management theory to describe what's usually a stimulus of some sort, really the independent variable in the research protocols, and it's referred to as manipulating mortality salience, like there's a mortality salience rheostat and they can kind of dial it up by showing us pictures of death or statements about our own death. Anyway, several really big conclusions about death anxiety and mortality salience have come out of the field in several hundred, actually several thousand published studies over the past 25 or so years. First, the potential for experiencing, just the potential for experiencing the total terror of no longer existing is always present in all humans, 24/7, always there. This is axiomatic. It's innate. It's part of what makes us uniquely human. 2, we've developed strategies, complex psychological, behavioral, social strategies to keep even the potential for our mortality to become salient away and to suppress it immediately if and when it does arise. And this defensive maneuver influences our behavior and is sometimes referred to as denial. So to me, what's in bold on the slide is the real takeaway. It's possible to agree with this conclusion about influencing behavior without necessarily agreeing with the way terror management theory gets there. The central and most controversial claim made by terror management theory is that death anxiety has a special status above all other forms of anxiety, really independent of all other forms of anxiety. Avoidance of mortality salience has generated its own unique set of defense mechanisms, unique neurobiological subsystems. Our responses to mortality salience, according to terror management theory, are not about anxiety and the existing anxiety systems, but about the potential for anxiety. It seems simple, but it's a really important distinction in the death anxiety business, the distinction between warding off the thought of mortality salience, I should say, and preventing it from ever emerging, versus shooing it away if it ever does make it into awareness. Here's how terror management theory characterizes those two dimensions. First, there is the unconscious strategies, what terror management theory calls distal strategies, that act like kind of a defensive shield, sort of like Star Wars, but maybe not so much shooting down incoming thoughts of personal extinction as actively resisting their ability somehow to penetrate our awareness. One of the ways this is accomplished is through maintaining a cultural worldview. This means being part of something larger than yourself, and lots of psychological schools talk about finding meaning in this way, by being part of something larger than yourself. And this is really just the terror management theory version of a widely shared idea. In this case, this cultural worldview also provides a valid set of standards about what's good, and we gain self-esteem by conforming to those standards. And it also contains kind of the justification, the kind of basic motivating drives behind what in this tradition is referred to as immortality projects, the kind of things that we do to be remembered, to make something that would endure. And again, what makes an okay project is something that is determined through the standards and beliefs and ideals of the cultural worldview. When mortality salience sneaks in, we cling more tightly to our worldview and to people who are like us, not them. This provides kind of a booster shot of self-esteem. Broader research traditions call this effect palliative compensation. It's important, though, to point out that that's not a conscious strategy. The conscious strategy is maybe kind of like Plan B, when mortality salience actually does make it around the Maginot Line, the impregnable defense line, and some set of distraction or suppression behaviors ensue. One of the most effective, of course, is to just, in the case of death anyway, push it, the thought of our death, off into the distant future, not something that needs to be worried about now. So let me just be clear right now that the reason we needed to bring the terror management theory ideas into the discussion right from the beginning is that TMT is big. It dominates the death and dying conversation, both kind of highbrow and in the popular culture. It's very well researched, in a manner of speaking. There's a huge research base on this ever-present potential to experience a terror of no longer existing. Nevertheless, John and I, and plenty of others, find the support for this idea of a innate, hardwired terror that cannot be faced and only avoided, really not to be completely convincing. Also not very useful. We believe that there are capabilities, psychosocial capabilities available to each of us, not just a few with superpowers, that make it unnecessary to constantly, to always, maybe sometimes to always distract and suppress, and counterproductive to set up a Star Wars shield. Does death anxiety come from something that's innate to being human? I think it comes from something that's innate to being alive. We're defined by how we respond to it. In that sense, John and I agree with terror management theory. We just maybe see a wider range of response options. So from here, let's start moving backward into the kind of cultural history of death anxiety and see what we find out about its innateness, about different approaches to buffering it, and about the possibility of facing it. I'm going to take us to the first stop, which is, I'll say, the beginning of the modern era, and then I'll hand it over to John. If there's a better place to start looking into death anxiety's background than the Epicureans, I don't know what it is. They are often thought of as the beginning of kind of a modern thinking tradition because they believed, as many, but not all of us do today, that we're made up of tiny particles that combine and recombine like Lego pieces to form all the variety in the world around us, and us. The Epicureans thus were called atomists, and they also focused really centrally in their philosophy on reducing suffering, which they actually thought was accomplished not with some high-flying lifestyle, as the term has come down to be, kind of associated with now, but in fact the Epicurean school of thought, in this school of thought, suffering is reduced and pleasure is gained not by more wine and madder music, but through a simple life, through the virtues of friendship, and especially a calm mind. Which gets to why their way of thinking is so relevant to us today. It is, in brief, because they believed the biggest single threat to a calm and peaceful mind is fear of death. These were folks who recognized the issue of death anxiety a couple thousand years ago and took the opposite view from terror management theory. They didn't posit any kind of total terror at all. In fact, how the Epicureans attempted to address the threat of death is most famously spoken in Epicurus's letter to Menocius, where he said, "Death is nothing to us. When we are, death is not come. When death is come, we are not. It is nothing then to the living or to the dead, for with the living it is not, and the dead exist no longer." Here's a logical, not so poetic formulation of the argument, which is that a state is bad only if it can actually be experienced at some time. Therefore, my being dead is bad for me only if I can experience it, but I can only experience what happens, what occurs before I'm dead, and my being dead only happens after my death. Therefore, I can't experience me being dead. Therefore, being dead is not bad for me. Note, they're not talking about dying, which does happen in life and can be experienced and can be bad or difficult, nor are they talking about the moment of death, but rather the state of being dead, of extinction, which is precisely what the very idea of that extinction is, what terror management theory is based on. That's what terror management theory claims we build civilizations for, to avoid even thinking about, while the Epicureans say, terror? What terror? I'm not going to experience something bad. I'm sure it's not going to come as a big surprise to anyone here to be told that really intelligent people have been arguing about this reason not to even be concerned about death. Death is nothing to us for centuries. Recently, like in the 70s, a modern philosopher Thomas Nagel discussed the argument at length in his succinctly titled Death. He raises the idea that sometimes things you don't experience can be bad for you, like a rumor. Epicurean counterargument might be that that is really only true if you can experience the results of the rumor. Another point is that death is a loss, and loss is bad. It's bad because it deprives us of something. Well, again, the Epicureans might say that the loss is only bad if you actually experience the loss, but another question, and it's going to be something that we will be addressing from several different perspectives today, is the metaphor, the model, the very idea of death as loss. As we do say it, loss of life. There may well be other ways of looking at it. Finally, a counter-argument is that we can experience things actually that haven't happened yet because they do have a form of existence once we think them. Can a future event be an object of attention now and thus be bad for you? Well, of course. I mean, isn't that what anxiety is all about? Giving reality now to something that only has a possible reality sometime in the future. Our purpose here isn't to settle the argument. It's to help us focus on exactly what we fear and why we fear it. And the argument obviously doesn't work for everyone. In fact, it really only works for people who are attracted to Epicureanism overall, who are living a lifestyle and behaving in a way that is supported by the philosophy. So it's not just the argument alone that gives people comfort, it's the overall set of life ideas and activities that people live under and live through that gives them comfort. In terror management theory terms, Epicureanism offers a cultural worldview. The assertion that you don't need a buffer would be seen as just another buffer in the TMT view. To us, the bottom line of the Epicurean logical construct is that the badness lies precisely in our anticipation of the loss of life, the idea of experiencing things that haven't happened yet. This then is potentially under our control. We can't realistically train ourselves not to bring future events into our present. In fact, we wouldn't even want to not be able to do that. but we can train ourselves to bring future events into our immediate awareness in a way that doesn't precipitate such anxious reactions. So the Epicureans were obviously addressing something that was a big concern in their time, or they wouldn't have made it so central. So this might be kind of asking the obvious, but if people in 300 BC already feared death, and probably had for some time before that, where do we start to see our species exhibiting death anxiety?